Hello, ceramic students. So I wanted to show you guys how to make your own slip for when you start connecting um, pieces of clay, maybe a piece of clay that is leather hard with a piece of clay that is still has a lot of moisture in it. So a plastic piece of clay, and you make something that you wanted to attach to that leather hard piece. Um, if you take that plastic piece of clay and you just put it on here and you smooth it in there and you think, wow, that looks fantastic. It's perfect. You just kind of blend it in. Even if it looks like it's connected, it will dry at different paces and will just come right off once it's dry. So this will probably dry much quicker because this is a bigger piece of clay. Even though this is at the leather hard stage already, this is thinner and will dry really quick. And because it's drying at a different rate, it's going to crack in between and just like fall right off. So I've had a lot of students that think they can just skip that part, and they even get it to dry to the bone dry stage, and it still looks like it's attached. And then we fire it in the kiln, and when it's bisque fired, it just comes right off. So score and slip. It's so important. Um, so I'm going to show you guys real quick how to make your own slip, because when you are attaching this, scoring is the act of like scratching the surface of the clay bodies. So like I just scratched the surface there. If I was attaching this piece of clay, again, I should have kept my, let's say I wanted to attach. And two, you would do this if you were using two leather hard pieces as well. So if I was connecting this leather hard piece to this leather hard piece, I would still have to score and slip. Again, because you want these two clay bodies to become one piece or one consistent clay body. And what's going to happen when you score and slip, when you break the surface and you put slip in there, it gives that moisture an opportunity to kind of travel between the two, and it makes these two one. It brings them together. So I scratch the surface here. That's called scoring. I'm going to scratch the surface of the piece that I'm attaching. So you can see, and depending on if it's leather hard, you probably want to scratch really well, like really scratch into the surface, not to the point that you're going through the wall, but just really make sure that you get it opened up enough that it can absorb that moisture. So at this point, I would take my slip, which is what we're going to be making. It's pretty much clay mixed with water. It has kind of like a pudding consistency, and it has a lot of clay content in it, so it's going to act as a connecting piece for the two pieces of clay, but enough water that it can kind of even itself out between the leather hard and the plastic. I hope that makes sense. So at this point, I've got it squished on there. You want to kind of compress it enough and get kind of any air bubbles out of there, and then you can blend it together at the seam. And if you're worried about that seam not connecting, you can also make a coil. You gotta make a real tiny coil for something like this because it's a pretty tiny piece that we're attaching. So I just rolled a tiny little coil here. And what I would do is I would just squish that in there really good and blend it. And we'll go over this process again when we start attaching different elements to your pieces. I'm just trying to explain to you what the purpose of this slip that we're going to make is when we're building with clay. All right, so I attached it, I blended it in there together. If I want that to be, more separate from the piece, I can come back in here and kind of carve it away. I might even wait until this piece is leather hard and it feels like these two are of the same moisture content, and come back in here and carve it and refine that surface how I want it to look, okay? So maybe that's 1 foot, and I'm going to do 3 more or 2 more or something. Whatever it is you're attaching, that's essentially how you do it. Again, I'll go over that process again at another time. But to make slip, so this is a fresh batch of slip. So you can see there's still a lot of water in there. And it will eventually evaporate. But this is pretty decent. It's kind of pudding consistency. It doesn't really drip. And I've got a lot in here. You can see in this one, this is clay that is a little bit more mature. I've had it for a longer period of time. It's getting thicker, which is kind of nice because sometimes when you're dealing with really wet slip, it gets really sloppy and it's hard to manage. So this is a little bit thicker. I don't know what you'd call that. More of like a custard, I guess. Guess maybe I'm hungry. So, yeah, this is just a little bit thicker slip. It works the same. If you prefer more watered down slip versus this thicker stuff, that's up to you. So the first thing you want to do when you're going to make your slip is find a container. I like these kind of thicker plastic containers with a lid that will close tightly. If you don't have one with a lid, you can use like saran wrap or something. Just trying to keep the moisture in so that you don't have to keep adding water to it. It's better if you can just close it up nice and tight and not worry about it spilling, and it's just simply easier. So I have these. You might want to go out and buy some chocolate gelato, eat the whole thing, and then you've got a container for your slip. It's a good excuse to eat ice cream. So start out with my container. So I have these pieces left over from a slab project that I was doing. I allowed these pieces to get bone dry. And I didn't really have enough for this jar. So this morning I took out, my fresh clay, and I kind of just took pieces of it, made it thin, and kind of let it just sit out for a few hours. And that's what these pieces are. And they got to that bone dry stage pretty quick. Especially now that we're stuck inside, the air circulation, I think, really helps dry these out really quickly. So I've got all these bone dry pieces of clay. You can use plastic clay to make slip, but it takes longer. When you have the bone dry, it like really sucks up the water when you pour it in there, and you can have good slip ready to go the next day if you use bone dry. This stuff, because there's already water in it, it takes longer for it to kind of like absorb and evaporate and become the right consistency that you want. So I recommend just taking some clay out, especially since you guys are just starting. Like I said, spread it out so it's thin. It'll dry really quick. And then what you're going to do is you're going to break it up into small pieces and put it in your jar, okay? As small as you can go. It doesn't have to be teeny tiny pieces. You don't have to take a hammer to it or anything, but here you can see how fragile bone dry clay is. You can really just, it's like breaking chocolate. All right, so you can see I've got all that bone dry clay in there. It's gonna give me a good amount of slip. A little bit of slip will go a long way. So I'm going to pour water into this. If you've ever made mashed potatoes before, you would do this almost in the same way, where you cut up your potatoes, you put it in the pot, and then you fill the water just above the surface of your pile of potatoes. In this case, your pile of bone dry clay. So I'm gonna pour water just so it's just barely above the top pieces of that clay. All right, so you can see I added water to it. It's just barely at the surface of the clay. You can even see bubbles coming up because it's already absorbing the water. If you listen, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but you can even hear it kind of hissing and fussing. So it's already doing what it's supposed to be doing. I'm not even going to stir this at this point. I'm just going to let the water do its work. The bone dry clay is going to suck all that up. I'm just going to put the top on, leave it sit overnight, and tomorrow I'll check it. What's going to happen is it's going to absorb all that water. You might find that a lot of the clay will sink to the bottom, the water to the surface, but hopefully it will have kind of broken up all of that bone dry clay. You can just come in with the brush that I gave you guys, stir it up real good. It might take you like a minute or two to kind of stir it up. But within 24 hours, you should have a pretty good slip to work with, okay? And if it's too watery, just leave it out without the top on for a few hours, and that water will evaporate, and then you should be good to go, okay? So that is the process of making your own slip so that you can start attaching pieces, okay? Thanks, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help.